Hello and welcome back to the part 2 of my Skyrim scripting tutorial. In the last one we set up MCM and installed the necessary files. In this one we're actually going to create a mod configuration menu for Skyrim. So first thing we need to do, obviously, is to open the mod we prepared last time. So just select it, click active file, and you're good to go. It'll automatically load any master files it needs. Okay, once we've loaded in, we want to search for the quest we made last time, the quest object. If you're following my tutorial, it'll be named same as this one, or similar. And that's why you want to name it something memorable so it's easy to find. When I open that up, you want to go to your scripts tab on the right hand side here, and you'll want to open the script we made last time. And you can either open it edit source to edit it in the default editor, but I've got mine set up to work with um, Notepad++. The normal editor will work fine, it's just I prefer Notepad++, it has a few extra features that make things easier. Alright, so now we can actually begin coding the actual menu itself. The first thing we need to do is we need to write an on-page reset event. So what this does is any function inside it, or everything inside it, is triggered when the page gets loaded. So every time a player opens the mod configuration menu and clicks on balance leveling, this event gets called and executed. I'm just going to put end event at the end so I don't forget to put it there later. Okay, inside here is where we want to put everything, where we design the appearance of the actual menu, what buttons are in it and such. So we need to declare what order our entries are going to be displayed in first. And the way that works is using set cursor fill mode left to right. So you can MCMs have two columns and you can either fill them left to right or top to bottom. So just write top to bottom in there if you prefer it that way. But I prefer left to right, it's just easy to keep track of where each thing is positioned, in my opinion. But if you find it easier to do it the other way, go for it. Then we need to start our first actual menu entry, which is going to be a header. So to make a heading, or header option as it's called, just type add header option, and we write a string, which is a type of variable made up of characters, letters, numbers, sometimes symbols. We just want to write mod settings. That's the heading, that will do for now. And close the brackets, and I'm just going to put a comment after that saying L1. So that's in the leftmost, the first, that's on the top, the first, yeah, sorry. It's in the left column on the first row, L1. I'd just like to do that so it's easier to keep track of where each option is that I put in. Next up, we want to write a empty option. So we write add empty option and brackets. That's in the right column and the first row. So that way we don't have our next entry won't be level with the header. Now these are entirely optional, but it just makes the menu look a bit better. Now we want to add our first actual button. So we need to add a add toggle option ST. Now, the ST is important because that's the new method for setting up an MCM menu, so we can use states, which just cut down on the amount of coding you have to do and makes it a bit more readable for humans. Next up is we want to write the ID of our button, which is what we'll use to reference it in the code later. We also want to write toggle tire mod. So this second string is what the user will see. It will be written next to the button. And then we want to assign it a variable. So I'm going to call it toggle mod, and I like to put a B on the end so it's only remember it's a boolean. So booleans are 1 zeros or off and on variables. Then close that bracket and I comment that, and it is now on the left row, but the second column. Sorry, left column, second row. So that's a checkbox option. So if you click on it, the box gets checked. Although it doesn't work like that yet. We've got to actually give it some functionality. Now I'm just going to duplicate that 3 times because we need 3 of these buttons. So this one's going to be right 2. And this one's going to be left 3. Is that right? Left 1, R1, L2. Yeah. We need to change this one to make it reset stats. Reset stats button. So we'll use this to reset mod altered stats. The user wants to remove the changes made by this mod. There's some more details to that we can add into the tooltip later, because it doesn't just work straight away. You have to quit out of the menus. Stats. So this is the boolean again. So it'll, whenever the page is loaded, it'll read this boolean and set the checkbox accordingly. So if this boolean's true, the checkbox will be ticked. So each one needs to have its own checkbox, of course. And we also want a force calc button. So then users can just click this and have it update their stats according to the mod settings once they quit out the menus. Force stat calculation. And we obviously need to give it its own boolean. Force calc should do it. Now that came up on its own because I have my notes on my other monitor with Notepad++ open. But you can just type it and that's fine. Okay. We then need to make some. We want to add another empty option. And I'm going to make sure we close the brackets, which I've forgotten to do up here. So then we're back to the right hand side, R4. And then we want to add another header called attributes. Close that. So this will just be the heading for where we have health, mana, and stamina settings. Then we just want to add another empty option there, so that we can have our, whoops. So it's this semicolon thing is what you use for commenting. So anything after those is a comment and isn't counted as code. So those are totally optional. but I recommend using comments as much as possible, just so you remember how your code works, and it just helps you learn as well. Alright, so after those, we can add our slider options. So these are going to be the sliders that allow the users to choose how much of each attribute they want to gain or lose on each level up. So they're this pretty much the same as toggle options. We want the first thing to be the ID we refer to them by. The second bit is what the user sees. And then the third bit is the variable they check. So we want these to check a float rather than an integer. So I'm going to go HPF. I'm just going to duplicate that and do it for every attribute. So we need Magica, and we'll just call the float magf, and we want the stamina, so we'll just call that stamina, and then stem float. So F is for float. So there's two main number variables you can use, integers or floats. Floats let you do decimal points, and in the game's code, most active values are already floats, so it's just easier to use a float rather than having to convert it between floats and integers. Generally, you want to, whenever you have the option, you want to use a float rather than an integer. Okay, next up we want to do our toggle states. So I'm just going to write this here. Whoops, it's not a yoggle state, it's a toggle state. Just going to write that here. I remember what this section's for. And the way we write, so this is where we write the actual functionality for our buttons. And they're written similar to events, but they're called state. So we want to write state, and then our button's ID, which is, our first one is toggle mod. Then below that, let's just write end state, so we don't forget to do it later. Inside that, we want to write a few events. So we want to write event on select st. So on select state, which means when someone clicks the button, we want the boolean to be toggled, and which means we do exclamation mark toggle that variable. Exclamation mark just means opposite of, so this means make the boolean equal the opposite of what it currently equals. So if it equals true, then it'll equal false after this is executed. Then we also need to force the checkbox to actually update alongside set the checkbox to update, because otherwise if we just leave it, it only updates when on-page reset is called, and we don't want to have to have the user reload the entire page for every time they change a setting. So we call toggle MB. So this will force the checkbox to update, and it will read what this boolean says and apply that to the checkbox. So if the boolean says false, it'll force the checkbox to say false as well. Then we want to end that event. Oops, end event. Now capitalization is kind of weird with coding. So some things like event names and that usually don't matter with capitals, but with variables you have to be exact. And then that's different again for each every like coding language. So you just gotta get used to different syntaxes. Okay, so our next event is on highlight. So in this we want to This is the event that executes when. Didn't write that properly. Okay. On highlights state. So this event is called when when someone mouses over the button. Inside here, we want to do set info text, and since this is just the old included in the old MCM, you don't need a st suffix. So set info text, and as you might have guessed, this is basically a tooltip. So we're just going to tell the user in more detail what this button does. So it turns off all mod functions. Maybe I should write features. Features. But it does not reset stats. So if you want to keep your stats but you don't want the mod to keep going, this is what this button will be for. Of course it doesn't actually do that right now, we're just setting up the buttons. We'll do the actual mod features in the next tutorial. So we want to end that event. Save it. Oh, actually, I'm going to maximize this. I bet that was driving some people crazy. Sorry about that. So, that's how our button should actually be working. If we went in game right now and clicked on it, the checkbox will be ticked on and off, and the tooltip will show up. So we just want to duplicate that for each one of our other buttons. So we also need to update all the variables. So this one needs to be reset stats B, as does this one, and this one. And we want our reset stats thing to say something else. Let's make it, this will remove this mod's changes to stats once gameplay is resumed. Okay. I want to do that again for the final button. So what do we call our final one? Force calc. Force calc. We want to update its variables to be force calc B. Now you can see why I like Notepad++. It makes a lot of this a lot quicker than the default one where I'd have to write all this out manually. But it can be a bit difficult to get an external editor like Notepad working with the creation kit, unfortunately. We want this one to, this will retroactively update player stats according to current mod settings once gameplay resumes. Right. Now, actually, there's one more thing we want to do. Is we want when the page is reloaded, we want this one to be automatically toggled back off because we don't want this one left on. Otherwise, every time the player leaves the menu, it'll be forced back on. Actually, we'll just leave that for now. We'll do that in the final tutorial. Anyway, so that's our 3 toggle states done. And the other great thing I like about Notepad++ is I can do this and just minimize them, which also makes this comment a lot more useful as well. So below this, we want to write another comment. Well, I like to write the comment, and this is going to be where our slider states are kept. So there, you write it the same way we write the toggle states. So state, then its name, which is HP, the first one. Do end state, so we don't forget to do it later. And now sliders are a little more complicated. So, sorry, I'm just checking my notes. I forget what the event's called. Within the slider state, we want to write an event called onSliderOpen. So event on slider open st. We want to do double brackets and the event so I don't forget to do it later. Inside that we need a bunch of functions. First one is set slider dialog start value to HPF, our float that we made earlier. So when people when people click on the slider and it opens up, it will just set its value to whatever the float currently is, which is what we want. Next, we want to set the default value. Set slider dialog default value. Now, I'm not entirely sure what this does, because if we open it by default, it'll just assign this variable, and this doesn't seem to occur. This doesn't seem to affect the actual default button from my own testing, but we'll just put it in there in case. So we want them to gain 1 HP by default. And then the next one is set slider dialog range, and this is the minimum and maximum numbers the slider can go to. So I want them to be able to go into negatives, so I'm going to put in minimum is -10, maximum is 10. You can put that as high as you want, but I think anything more than that's probably just cheating, but if people request it, we can always change it later. And the final function for this event is set slider dialog interval. Set slider dialog interval, which is how many numbers it goes up by every time you hit the arrow keys, and the multiples of numbers allowed. So if I put 5 in there and I hit the arrow key, it'll go up by 5. If I drag it by my mouse, it can only go in multiples of 5. So 5, 10, 20, 5, 10, 15, 20. I can do math, I swear. Alright, so our next event is on slider accept. On slider accept. st, so state. And inside this we want to write float value, because this will spit out give us the number that the user has selected in the slider, which we would obviously want to set to be the new value. Similar to how in the toggle options, we had to force it to update the actual value. So in here we want to write HPF equals the value that the user picked, and then we want to write set slider option value st and HPF. Now you could also just put value directly in here, but I just prefer to try and use the variable everywhere as possible, so just so you have more control, and it's a bit more, if you have to update functions later on, it's just better to do. But it doesn't really matter at the moment. Right, and we've got one more event to do, if I remember correctly, which is event on highlight, which is exactly the same as the toggle. So in here we want to set our tooltip. Set, if I can remember how to do that. I just had a brain block. Set info text. And we want to just say health change per level. And we want to end the event, of course. Don't want to forget to end an event. No one likes errors. Right, so that's our whole slider done. So that slider will be working if we went in game right now. So let's just copy paste that and duplicate it twice so we can put in the other two sliders. So we need magic. Change its variables over to the magic variable that we set. Magic F, Mag F. Change this to magic. Actually, we better get rid of this space here as well. Don't forget to save it occasionally, or actually save it all the time is probably better. I tend to save it almost constantly whenever I change anything. That's the magic state done. We want to do stamina, last but not least. Change that over to stam F. Stem F. Now if you're in the normal editor, I'm not sure if it'll let you do Control D to duplicate a line or Control C, Control V to copy paste. So you might have to just write all this out manually, which is fine, it'll just take you a little longer. Stamina. We're getting close to being done now. Got one more thing to do within the script, and that is declare the variables. So by default, if you the Skyrim paper scripts tend to put variables at the bottom. I'm just used to coding in C# and that, where you usually put the properties at the top, but it doesn't really matter. But properties have to be declared outside of events. Well, they don't have to be, but if you declare them inside an event, nothing outside that event can use them. As you declare them as public variables and stuff, which just starts getting a bit complicated and is beyond the purview of this tutorial. So you want to start with what type of variable it is. So we want a boolean. We write property because we're declaring a property or a variable, and that's the name of the variable. And auto means it'll just take the default value or the value out of the property user interface window, which I'll show you after we put these in. So we just want to duplicate those and write in each variable that we need. So we want reset stats, which is this one. And we want force calc, which is this one. Then we need to do some float variables or float properties. And so, which we do the same way, except you write float instead of bool, of course. We need to do that for each of them again. And Mag F was the magic one, and then stemna F, I believe, or stem F. Go. And our scripting is complete. That wasn't so hard, was it? So give it a save. Give it a save, and then we want to close that. We want to edit it in the normal, the default editor, which some of you are already doing. Because if we save it in here, it'll compile and it'll tell us if we've done anything wrong. So I'm getting an error there, which says on line 9, I've written something incorrectly. Guessing I've misspelt property. No, that looks okay to me. Oh, I didn't put a space between the MagF and auto. Hopefully that's all it was. We've done something else wrong down at line 41, which is around here somewhere. 41. Right, so I've forgotten to rename the state correctly. So that needs to say reset stats. Oops, that's all capitals. Reset stats. And I'm guessing I probably did the same thing for the other one. Nope, that looks correct. So if we save it, that should be fine. Reset stats. Now, put an extra S in the variable. And I've spelled add slider option incorrectly. Variable reset stats. Guessing I've written that wrong because I copied it. Where's reset stats? Reset stats B is undefined. That'll be in the boolean. Yes. S. That's incorrect. Remove all the extra S's. Is that all of them? My recording cut out, so we're just going to do this bit again. So after you've saved and made sure there's no errors in your script, so Control S. Compilation succeeded. I go back to here, go into properties. You just want to set our floats HPF to default to 1, so that players by default gain 1 extra of each stat per level up. Make sure your mod name is correct. It can be named anything as long as it's recognizable. And set toggle mod on, or our toggle mod boolean to be on by default. And then you're done. And we can just load into the game. So we want to just load into the game. I'm just using some basic mods like alternate art to get into the game faster and test things. But it doesn't really matter. New game. Now I always use a new game when testing mods. Sorry, I'm just going to turn down the volume. Very loud. Start a new game when you're testing a scripting mod, or a mod with scripts in, because sometimes they get baked into the save and updates to the script won't work. So it shouldn't take long to load, it should be pretty much instant. You can just go into mod configuration, you can see how many are here. Go into it and hopefully your toggles are toggling, and your sliders are sliding. Very nice. Now, of course, they don't actually do anything just yet, and we'll be going into the actual functionality in the next tutorial. So I'll see you then.